The WNBA just admitted the quiet part out loud, and every league in professional sports should be terrified. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why one rookie from Iowa forced the most powerful women in sports to break their own rulebook in broad daylight, and why the people who lost power because of it have never been angrier. Before we dive in, if you care about the future of women's basketball and the kind of content that actually breaks news instead of recycling takes, hit subscribe and turn on the bell right now. It takes 3 seconds, and it directly funds the next investigation we put out. Now let's get to it. The day the WNBA stopped being a side project. For most of its history, the WNBA has lived in the shadow of a much larger machine. It shared arenas, shared press rows, and shared airline cabins with commercial passengers. Its most loyal fans learned the rhythm of the league, a sold-out arena here, a viral moment there, followed by a long off-season where the discourse faded and the league office mostly hoped for the best. Then Caitlin Clark arrived. The #1 overall pick of the 2024 WNBA draft didn't just join the Indiana Fever. She detonated every metric the league had quietly tracked for decades. Ticket demand collapsed search engines. Road arenas that had averaged 4,000 fans suddenly drew 17,000. National television windows that had been buried on weekday afternoons became appointment viewing. By the time her rookie season hit its midpoint, the league office was no longer talking about development cycles. It was negotiating survival. The person who understood this first was not, contrary to popular narrative, the National League office. It was the woman who had watched a similar wave hit the league almost 30 years earlier and was now standing in the front office of Caitlin Clark's own franchise, Kelly Krauskopf. In September 2024, the Fever officially announced Krauskopf's return as president of basketball and business operations, a recreated role that gave one executive simultaneous authority over roster construction, sponsorship strategy, and the broader commercial blueprint of the league's most-watched team. This is the part most people miss. The transformation of the WNBA in 2024 and 2025 was not the work of a single commissioner issuing sweeping edicts from a podium. It was the combination of a league-level commissioner, Cathy Engelbert, the former Deloitte CEO, who became the WNBA's first-ever commissioner in 2019, making historic structural bets, and a team-level executive in Krauskopf, who could turn those bets into daily operations inside the Fever organization. If you want to know why this story matters, keep watching, because what happened next was not what the league's veterans were promised. The $2.2 billion bet that changed everything. In July 2024, the WNBA confirmed an 11-year media rights agreement with Disney, NBC Universal, and Amazon Prime Video. The reported value, $2.2 billion, a roughly 6-fold increase over the league's previous television contract. Subsequent reporting pushed the total value, including international and streaming extensions, past $3 billion. For a league that had been described for years as structurally unprofitable, this was the equivalent of being handed a new operating system overnight. The leverage that produced this number was Caitlin Clark's rookie season stat line and the surrounding audience it pulled along with it. Television partners were no longer buying a development project. They were buying a growth story they could sell to advertisers. Disney, NBC, and Amazon all needed the same thing: a product that could absorb prime-time inventory and hold attention across multiple platforms. Engelbert walked into those negotiations with something she had not possessed at any previous point in her tenure: proof of demand. League sources confirmed that the deal would deliver more than 125 nationally televised WNBA games annually, starting in 2026. That number alone restructured everything. Let that settle for a moment. Before this deal, the WNBA's national footprint was a handful of scattered CBS and ESPN broadcasts. After this deal, it became a multi-platform, year-round entertainment property. Sponsorship rates followed the same trajectory. Jersey patches doubled, then tripled in some markets. Arena signage transitioned from local insurance agents to global brands. Now here's the question I want you to hold on to, because the answer will ruin the league's carefully crafted marketing narrative. If the league could command this kind of money without ever changing its playing style, why did it change its playing style at the exact same time? We'll come back to that. But first, you need to understand what happened in the building Caitlin Clark actually plays in. Kelly Krauskopf returns, and Fever front office becomes the template. For nearly a decade after leaving Indiana in 2018, Kelly Krauskopf had been operating in a different layer of the basketball ecosystem. She had been part of the NBA's league office and was instrumental in events like the NBA Africa Game and the Basketball Africa League. She was not retired. She was waiting. When the Fever brought her back, they did not give her a ceremonial title. They gave her operational command of everything that touches Caitlin Clark's professional life: roster construction, salary allocation, coaching philosophy, sponsorship packaging, scouting infrastructure, and the day-to-day comms strategy that surrounds the most scrutinized athlete in women's basketball. The Fever are now a fascinating case study in front office architecture. Most WNBA teams operate with a tight staff and a general manager who splits time between basketball decisions and business decisions. The Fever, by reintroducing Krauskopf in a president-level role, effectively separated the two functions and signaled to the rest of the league that this was the new floor, not the ceiling. Stay with me here, because this part of the story rarely gets told. The classic WNBA narrative treats Caitlin Clark as the cause and the league as the effect. The more accurate read is that Caitlin Clark is the accelerant, and experienced operators like Krauskopf are the ones who poured gasoline on it strategically. Every move the Fever made from late 2024 onward, from prioritizing perimeter shooters in free agency to redesigning travel accommodations to overhauling how they handled media access, was designed around a single premise: maximize the value of every minute Caitlin Clark is in uniform. That premise, when applied at a league level, is what produced the rulebook controversies. The rookie resistance, real or manufactured. It became fashionable during Caitlin Clark's rookie year to describe the league's veteran players as openly hostile to her. If you followed the coverage closely, you already know that framing was, at best, incomplete. The actual dynamic was messier and more interesting. Some established players did take real physical shots at Clark during her first WNBA season: hard fouls, late closeouts, the kind of contact that in any other league would be flagged as retaliation. Other veterans privately expressed frustration about playing style differences, not about the player herself. Still others treated Clark with the kind of professional courtesy that the league's veterans had extended to every #1 pick in history. What was true across all three groups was this: the league office's response was dramatically asymmetric. Fouls that in previous seasons had been swallowed as part of the game's texture were now being reviewed, escalated, and publicly discussed as part of the league's officiating narrative. The protect the shooter emphasis that became associated with the 2024 season was not a slogan from a podium. It was a quietly enforced officiating direction that filtered down through referee supervisors and post-game reports. The first time Clark drew a flagrant foul in her rookie season, it became a national news cycle. Television analysts dissected it frame by frame. League officials, when asked, used language that any reader familiar with NFL suspension mechanics will recognize: emphasis on player safety, structured escalation, and protection of high-value possessions. Here's the part that should make every viewer uncomfortable. If a different rookie had been on the receiving end of those fouls, the officiating response would almost certainly have been different. The league office did not say this in those words. It did not have to. The pattern was visible on camera. What does that pattern mean for the future? Keep watching. We're about to enter the part of the story where the league's most controversial decision is finally being understood outside the Fever fan base. The Olympics decision that split a fan base. In July 2024, 12 players were named to the United States women's basketball roster for the Paris Olympics. Caitlin Clark, the most searched athlete in women's sports that summer, was not one of them. USA Basketball's official explanation cited her lack of senior team experience. Caitlin Clark had not been through a full Team USA training block. The veterans selected A'ja Wilson, Breanna Stewart, Diana Taurasi, Brittney Griner, Alyssa Thompson, and the rest had resumes that included either prior Olympic appearances, deep FIBA tournament runs, or both. By the criteria, USA Basketball stated publicly, Clark's omission was defensible. By the criteria the public applied, it was not. The conversation immediately broke into two camps. The first argued that Clark had earned the commercial gravity to override traditional selection logic. The second argued that international competition and Olympic medal politics were different products with different stakes, and that rewarding a rookie with an Olympic roster spot would distort the program. Both arguments had merit. What almost no one in the national conversation acknowledged was the third variable. The WNBA, not USA Basketball, fully controlled Clark's rights and her schedule. The decision to keep her stateside during the Olympic window was, whether acknowledged or not, a deliberate fatigue and asset management move. Clark was the league's most valuable inventory, maximizing her health and availability for the Fever's 2024 playoff push and the subsequent 2025 season. By far the most lucrative commercial windows on the league calendar was, from a business standpoint, the correct call. Whether it was the correct call for Clark's individual legacy is a different conversation, and one her representatives will eventually answer directly. What matters for this story is that the league's commercial structure had reached a point where the business logic of player deployment began to openly override the developmental logic that had defined women's basketball for decades. Hold that thought, because the next section is about the league's most expensive single policy shift, and it ties directly to the same logic: charter flights and the $2.2 billion mandate. In May 2024, just weeks before the regular season tipped off, the WNBA announced a full league-wide charter flight program for 2024 and 2025. Every team, regardless of market size, would travel on private aircraft for the duration of the season. The program was not optional. There was no opt-out clause for small market clubs worried about cost. For years, WNBA players had described the league's commercial travel arrangements in unflattering terms: long security lines, middle seats, connection delays, recovery days lost to red-eye flights. The cost argument from ownership was always the same. Chartering an entire fleet was an unaffordable luxury for a league whose financials were still considered fragile. The cost argument essentially died in 2024. Why? 3 reasons, each verified. First, the television deal had unlocked a new revenue tier. The $2.2 billion headline figure represented guaranteed baseline cash flow the league could use to underwrite operational expenses. Second, the audience surge attached to Caitlin Clark's rookie season created a security calculus that did not previously exist. Marquee road games drew crowds large enough that league security officials publicly flagged the protection of high-profile players, including Clark, as a Category 1 concern. Commercial travel, with its exposure at crowded airports, became a logistical liability. Third, and this is the part the WNBA rarely states publicly, chartering the league was a brand statement. Cathy Engelbert had spent 5 years positioning the WNBA as a top-tier professional property. Top-tier professional properties do not have their athletes boarding commercial flights. The decision was made because the league could finally afford to look like the product it was selling sponsors. The smaller market franchises absorbed the cost unevenly. Several publicly disclosed budget pressure during the 2024 season, but the policy held, and by 2025, it had become a baseline expectation rather than a privilege. That's why what you're about to hear next is so important. Because this is where the league office made a decision that, depending on who you ask, either secured its long-term future or set a trap for everyone who works inside it. The expansion bet 3 new teams, 1 new risk. In 2025, the Golden State Valkyries became the WNBA's 13th franchise, playing out of the Bay Area. In 2026, 2 more teams joined, the Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo. The league went from 12 teams to 15 in roughly 24 months. This is the part of the story where the WNBA's strategic logic becomes genuinely difficult to defend in public, and worth defending anyway. The argument against the expansion pace is straightforward. Adding 3 teams in 2 years strains the player pool. Existing rosters get diluted. Expansion drafts strip veterans off contender rosters. Coaching infrastructure becomes thin. The risk of competitive imbalance increases dramatically during the transition years. Several incumbent teams have privately expressed frustration that they were not given enough runway to prepare for the draft exposure. The argument in favor of the expansion pace is equally straightforward, and it is rooted in the same lesson the league learned from Caitlin Clark. The Clark era is a window, not an eternal state. Television appetites change, star players age, cultural moments pass. The WNBA learned in 2024 that it had a finite runway to convert momentum into institutional infrastructure. Expansion is the most aggressive way to monetize that runway. New markets means new sponsors, new ticket revenue, new local broadcast rights, new merchandise streams. Every additional franchise is another vehicle for selling the league's growth narrative to investors. The decision to expand at this pace, therefore, was not reckless growth. It was the league's leadership betting that momentum was a depreciating asset. The cost would be competitive pain for 2 or 3 seasons. The upside would be a permanent increase in the league's institutional footprint. The expansion draft for Portland and Toronto, finalized in early 2026, stripped talent from contenders like the Las Vegas Aces, the New York Liberty, and the Indiana Fever. That hurt. It hurt by design. Now let me ask you something directly, and I want you to answer in the comments after this video. If you were running the WNBA, would you have prioritized institutional growth over competitive balance for the next 2 seasons? Or would you have held the line and tried to extend the Clark-era boom more cautiously? Because that is the actual choice the league's leadership made, and the consequences of it are already visible in the standings. The television product gets a reshape. The new media rights deal didn't just add inventory, it changed what the cameras were pointing at. For decades, the WNBA's national broadcasts had a recognizable identity. Mid-game studio hits, post-game analysis framed around team storylines, and a steady pace that reflected the sport's traditional half-court architecture. That style survived because the league's audience tolerated it. The post-deal broadcasts look different. They look like modern primetime sports television. Faster cuts, tighter graphics packages, highlight-driven halftime segments, player mic D-up moments, coaches wired for live audio. The production vocabulary now used by Disney, NBC, and Amazon was built around a much more entertainment-forward product. This was not an accident. Television partners made clear during negotiations that they wanted a product that looked and felt like the NBA, not a development league with aspiration. The league agreed and adjusted accordingly. What that meant inside the building was a quiet revolution. Officiating crews were regraded, with supervised reviews emphasizing perimeter shooter protection, transition freedom, and possession flow. Defensive specialists who had built careers around physical interior defense found their foul tolerance shrinking. Coaches who had built game plans around grinding half-court defense found themselves being asked, essentially, to play a different sport. The product on the floor is faster now. The three-point line has become the most valuable real estate on the court, which has historically been Caitlin Clark's superpower. Half-court efficiency, which has historically rewarded interior post play, has been quietly deprioritized in the league's officiating focus. Now think carefully about what that means, because most viewers have not connected these 2 stories yet. If you change which style of basketball the rules reward, you do not just change the metagame. You change who wins. You change the kinds of players teams prioritize in the draft. Over time, you change the entire competitive ecosystem. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is how sports economics works. The WNBA's new television partners paid $2.2 billion because they believed the league could deliver a specific kind of product. The league's officiating and rules emphasis since 2024 has consistently moved toward that product. I want you to sit with that before we move to the next section, because the next part of this story is about who paid the price for those decisions and whether any of them are willing to admit it. The price: veterans, journeymen, and a shifting power balance. The hardest part of this transformation is not the headline number. It is the human cost the league rarely acknowledges publicly. Veterans who built their careers on physical interior play, the defensive player of the year types, the rebound and grinders, the lockdown post defenders, have seen their statistical value drop even as their effort levels remained unchanged. Not because they got worse, because the rules around them changed. Several established role players saw their per-minute impact metrics crater in 2024 and 2025, despite bringing the same energy and the same skills they had previously been rewarded for. This is not unusual in sports history. The three-point revolution in the NBA in the 2010s wiped out entire archetypes of big man. The WNBA's version of the same transition is now underway, and it is being driven not by analytics purists, but by television partners with specific audience expectations. The result is a quiet but profound power shift inside the league. Players who can shoot from the perimeter now command higher draft stock. Coaches who can run modern offensive systems are being prioritized for jobs over coaches whose identity was built on defensive toughness. The executive ranks, including Krauskopf's role in Indiana, increasingly reward multi-domain operators who can manage both basketball decisions and revenue strategy, rather than pure basketball lifers. This is the layered reality of the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. The player generates the audience. The franchise packages the audience into sellable inventory. The league office scales that inventory into a multi-billion-dollar television product. Each layer needs the others to function. If the Fever organization under Krauskopf ever faltered, a bad free agency cycle, a coaching change that disrupted identity, a sponsorship misstep, the entire chain loses a critical link. That is why her role exists in the first place. It is not ceremonial. It is structural. What the league office is actually building. The WNBA under Cathy Engelbert is now operating from a different playbook than it did in 2019, when she was first appointed as the league's inaugural commissioner. In 2019, Engelbert's job was stabilization, managing a product that had accepted loss as a long-term feature of its business model. By 2026, her job is acceleration, managing a product whose investors, television partners, and ownership groups expect annual growth at the kind of compounding pace that public market analysts apply to tech companies. This shift did not happen by accident. The television deal that Engelbert personally negotiated with Disney, NBC, and Amazon changed what the league's stakeholders expect from her office. The charter flight program, the expansion announcements, the officiating recalibration, all of these are downstream of the deal's existence. Without the deal, none of those decisions were affordable. Without Engelbert's commercial track record from her time as Deloitte's CEO, the deal itself probably would not have closed at the price it did. That is the part of the story most casual coverage gets backwards. Caitlin Clark is not the CEO of the WNBA. She is the asset. Kelly Krauskopf is not the league's commissioner. She is the franchise operator. Cathy Engelbert is the commercial architect. Each role is distinct. Each role is necessary. Each role is being tested by the moment we are currently in. The question everyone wants answered. So where does this all land? The WNBA in 2026 is faster, more televised, more valuable, more scrutinized, and more politically complicated than at any point in its 40-year history. The The league's audience has multiplied, its commercial footprint has expanded, its competitive structure has shifted, and its institutional promise has been raised in ways it cannot easily retract. The risk is real. The league has made itself dependent on the commercial appeal of a specific generation of players. Stars age, injuries happen, draft classes vary. The infrastructure being built right now was built around the assumption that the audience surge is permanent. If the surge cools, the debt does not cool with it. The opportunity is equally real. For the first time in WNBA history, a young athlete can look at the league and see not just a place to play professionally, but a place to build generational wealth. The lifetime earnings of a top-tier WNBA player are now measured in 7 figures rather than 6. Brand equity has crossed the threshold where foundational deals can outlast playing careers. Investment vehicles exist that did not exist 5 years ago. This is not the WNBA of 2019. This is not even the WNBA of 2022. This is a league being rebuilt in real time, with executive decisions being made, codified by television contracts, and ratified on the floor every single night. The question I want you to think about. Tonight, if you made it this far, you're already part of a small group of viewers who actually pay attention to what's happening beneath the headlines in women's basketball. So here's the question I want you to sit with. If the WNBA's structural decisions since 2024, the television deal, the expansion pace, the officiating recalibration, the team-level organizational restructuring inside Indiana were all driven by one player's commercial gravity, what happens to that structure the day her career arc bends? Do the rules tighten? Do the cameras revert to the old style? Do the expansion teams become viable on their own merits? Or were they only viable because of the gravity around them? I don't have a definitive answer. I have observations. And the observations tell me that the WNBA's leadership is gambling that the structure they are building now will outlast any single player, even the player who inadvertently forced its construction. That is a high-stakes bet. Whether it pays off determines whether the last few years are remembered as the moment the WNBA permanently matured, or as the moment it overcorrected and broke something that took decades to build. Where we go from here. This channel exists because the women's basketball story is, right now, the most important business story in American professional sports. It is also the most undercovered. The major networks layer their coverage with the same recycled talking points. Clark fever, rookie drama, viral highlights. We try to go further. The contract details, the front office power shifts, the rule changes that nobody is talking about yet, the expansion economics, the competitive balance math, the labor relations implications that will define the next CBA negotiation. If that is the kind of coverage you want more of, this is exactly where you should be. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, leave a comment telling me which part of today's breakdown surprised you most, the television deal mechanics, the fever front office under Krauskopf, or the expansion timeline, and we will pick the most requested topic for the next deep dive. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and never stop paying attention to where the real decisions in sports are actually being made.